The flight that changed everything. No. Written in simple English. No capital letters for narration voice generator. Long immersive storytelling, motivational tone, emotional depth. Suspense in early minutes to hold viewers. The air inside the first-class cabin was cool and quiet. Passengers leaned back in soft leather seats, sipping wine, reading newspapers, or closing their eyes for the long journey across the ocean. It was a flight like any other, at least for most of the people inside. But for one man, it would become a turning point in his life, a lesson carved in humility, and a reminder of what true strength really looks like. Keanu Reeves had boarded quietly, dressed in his usual simple way, black t-shirt, worn boots, and a jacket that had clearly seen years of use. He never tried to draw attention to himself. In fact, he preferred to slip through the world without disturbing it, but fate had other plans that evening. The seat next to him was taken by a sharply dressed businessman in his 40s. His watch glittered under the cabin lights. His phone rang every few minutes, and his tone was loud enough for everyone around to hear. He was the kind of man who wanted the world to know he had money, power, and influence. When he noticed Keanu taking his seat quietly, he raised an eyebrow, smirked, and muttered, "Figures. First class isn't what it used to be." Keanu didn't reply. He simply placed his bag under the seat and pulled out a small paperback novel. But the businessman wasn't done. "You know," he said loudly, "these airlines should keep first class exclusive. Now anyone can buy a ticket if they save up enough points. Ruins the atmosphere, don't you think?" A few other passengers glanced over. Recognizing Keanu instantly, they knew he was being insulted. Some whispered, some frowned, but Keanu remained calm, his face gentle, almost unreadable. The man leaned closer. "You don't look like you belong here. What do you do anyway? Must be some small-time guy playing rich." Still, Keanu said nothing. For most people, silence would feel like weakness, but in that silence was power, an unshakable calm that would soon turn the tables completely. The crack in the armor, the night sky outside the airplane was endless. Stars scattered like tiny fires across the black canvas. Inside, the cabin had grown quiet. Soft lights glowed above each seat. The kind of calm that makes people reflect on their lives when the world around them finally falls silent. The businessman sat stiffly, staring at his untouched drink. The ice had melted, leaving only pale water in the glass. He had been replaying the same moment again and again in his head. The old woman's trembling hands, Keanu's calm voice, and his own frozen fear. For years, he had told himself he was strong. He wore expensive suits, drove fast cars, signed big contracts. He thought strength was measured in numbers, in money, and who bowed their head when he entered a room. But tonight, sitting next to a man he had mocked, that illusion was breaking apart. The conversation begins. After hours of silence, the businessman finally spoke, his voice lower, almost hesitant. "You didn't even hesitate. When the turbulence started, you just stood up." Keanu looked at him kindly without judgment. "When someone needs help, you don't think. You just act." The businessman swallowed hard. "I couldn't move. I was frozen." Keanu gave a small smile. "Fear does that sometimes. But courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about choosing to do something anyway." The businessman looked down at his hands. They were still trembling slightly. He hated that Keanu could see his weakness, yet there was no mockery in Keanu's voice, no pride, no arrogance, only truth. Peeling away the mask after another pause, the businessman whispered, "Do you ever get scared?" Keanu nodded slowly. "All the time. Fear is human. I've lost people I loved. I've sat in hospital rooms not knowing if the call from the doctor would bring hope or heartbreak. I've walked into rooms where everyone expected me to be perfect, but inside I was breaking. Fear is always there. The question is, what do we do with it?" His words settled like stones in the businessman's chest. He had spent years pretending he had no fear. He had worn arrogance like armor. But sitting here, his armor felt heavy, useless, even laughable. The hidden paint, the businessman leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Keanu could hear. "I used to think money could fix everything. But the truth is, my son hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. He says I only cared about work, about image. Maybe he's right. I bought him cars, paid for schools, but I was never really there. Maybe that's why I got so angry when I saw you. You look like someone who doesn't need all this to be respected." His voice cracked at the last word. Respected. For a moment, the businessman didn't look like a powerful executive. He looked like a father who had lost something priceless, something money could never buy back. Keanu didn't rush to answer. He let the silence breathe. Let the man's words hang in the air. Then he said softly, "Respect doesn't come from money. It comes from presence, from how you treat people when no one's watching." The businessman felt a sting behind his eyes. He turned away, ashamed. The moment of humility hours passed. Most of the passengers were asleep, but the businessman lay awake, his mind storming. He realized how empty his victories had been. The promotions, the trophies on his office shelf, the applause of colleagues. It all felt meaningless compared to the look on his son's face the day he walked out the door. For the first time in years, the businessman whispered words he had buried deep inside. "I wish I could start over." Keanu turned his head and looked at him. His eyes carried both sadness and warmth. "You can. Every morning you wake up is another chance. Life doesn't stop giving us opportunities to change. It's us who stop believing we can." The businessman closed his eyes. Tears slipped silently down his cheeks, hidden in the dim light of the cabin. The first step after the flight. The morning light spilled through the oval windows of the airplane as it touched down. The long night in the sky was over, but for the businessman, something inside him was only beginning. He had spent the last hours replaying Keanu's words. "Every morning you wake up is another chance." The sentence rang like a bell in his mind. It was simple, almost too simple, yet it carried a weight that unsettled him. As the passengers unbuckled their belts and gathered their belongings, the businessman glanced at Keanu. He wanted to say thank you, wanted to admit how deeply their short conversation had shaken him, but the words stuck in his throat again. Keanu, as if sensing the hesitation, gave him a gentle nod, before standing and helping the elderly woman from earlier retrieve her bag from the overhead compartment. The moment at the gate, the passengers stepped off the plane into the busy terminal. Voices filled the air, luggage wheels clattered against the tiles, and announcements echoed overhead. The businessman walked slowly, watching Keanu from a distance. It struck him how people reacted to the actor. Some recognized him immediately and gasped quietly. Some approached shyly for a handshake. Others didn't even notice him. But no matter how people treated him, Keanu responded the same way, with kindness, patience, and humility. The businessman felt a pang of shame. He remembered the first words he had spoken on the plane, mocking, arrogant, shallow. Yet this man, this stranger, had answered with dignity instead of anger. When Keanu finally turned to leave toward his connecting gate, the businessman took a deep breath and rushed forward. "Wait," he said. Keanu stopped and turned, his face calm as ever. The businessman hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Thank you, not just for helping that woman, for helping me see myself." Keanu smiled gently. "Sometimes all we need is a mirror. Life shows us who we are when we least expect it." The businessman nodded, struggling to hold back tears in the middle of the crowded terminal. "I don't know where to start," he whispered. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "Start small. Call someone you miss. Tell them you're sorry. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real." With that, Keanu turned and walked away, blending into the stream of travelers, leaving the businessman standing in the middle of the terminal with his heart pounding. The phone call that evening, the businessman sat in his hotel room. The city lights glowed outside the window, but inside, his world felt dim and uncertain. He poured himself a drink, stared at it for a long time, then set it aside. He picked up his phone instead. His hand trembled as he scrolled through his contacts. One name made his chest ache: his son. He hadn't called in years. Their last conversation had ended in shouting. His son had told him, "You care more about strangers in your meetings than you ever cared about me." The words had cut deep, but instead of apologizing, the businessman had walked away, burying himself in work, pretending the wound didn't exist now. Keanu's words echoed again. "Call someone you miss. Tell them you're sorry." He pressed the number. The dial tone rang once, twice, 3 times. His heart pounded. Finally, a tired voice answered. "Hello?" The businessman swallowed hard. "It's me. Your dad." Silence, then cold and sharp. "What do you want?" The businessman's throat tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to explain, to say it wasn't his fault. But for once in his life, he dropped the armor. "I want to say I'm sorry," he whispered. "I wasn't there. I thought money was enough. I thought giving you things meant I was giving you love. I was wrong." The silence on the other end stretched painfully long. The businessman felt tears burning his eyes. Finally, his son spoke again, his voice softer, uncertain. "Why now?" The businessman closed his eyes, because someone reminded me that every morning is a chance to change. And I don't want to waste another one. The line stayed quiet, but the businessman could hear his son's breathing. It was enough. It meant he hadn't hung up. It meant the door was still open. The first crack of light, after the call ended, the businessman sat in the dark hotel room, tears streaming down his face. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't healing yet, but it was something. A beginning. He thought of Keanu again, his calmness, his humility, his quiet strength. He realized something powerful. Real strength isn't loud. It isn't about showing off. It's about showing up. For the first time in years, the businessman felt hope, walking into the fire. The sun was rising over the city when the businessman stood in front of the hotel mirror. His tie hung loosely around his neck. His suit freshly pressed, but his eyes looked different. There was no mask of arrogance, no forced confidence. Instead, there was hesitation, even fear. Last night's call with his son had cracked something open inside him. The silence on the line had been painful, but the fact that his son hadn't hung up meant there was still hope. That fragile thread of connection gave him strength. But strength is tested in action, not in thought. Today he had to step back into the world that had shaped his old self. His office. The meeting room. The glass building gleamed as he walked inside. The familiar smell of polished marble and coffee filling the lobby. Employees moved quickly, heads down, papers in hand. When he entered the executive floor, conversations stopped for a moment. People nodded respectfully, some forced smiles, but there was no warmth in their eyes. He noticed it now, something he had ignored before. Fear. Distance. The way people avoided meeting his gaze for too long. His assistant hurried toward him with a stack of files. "Sir, the board meeting starts in 20 minutes. They're expecting the usual report." The businessman paused. The usual report meant numbers, profits, strategies, all the things he had once used to prove his worth. But today he felt a pull inside him to do something different. "Thank you," he said softly. "But today, I want to speak differently." The assistant blinked, confused. The boardroom silence. 20 minutes later, he stood at the head of a long table surrounded by men and women in sharp suits. Charts glowed on the large screen behind him, filled with rising numbers, projected profits, all carefully prepared to show victory. He looked at the slides, then at the faces in front of him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he closed the laptop, turning off the presentation. Gasps rippled around the table. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice lower than usual, stripped of arrogance. "I need to tell you something. For years, I thought success was about numbers, about making us look bigger, stronger, richer. But last night I realized something important. Success means nothing if we lose respect along the way, if we forget the people sitting right here." The room fell silent. Some exchanged uneasy glances. "I've pushed all of you too hard," he continued. "I've spoken with pride instead of gratitude. I've demanded results without seeing the cost to your lives, your families, your health. And for that I am sorry." The silence grew heavy. He could feel their eyes on him, some skeptical, some surprised, some hopeful. For the first time in years, he let himself be vulnerable in front of them. The resistance. A man at the far end of the table finally spoke, his tone sharp. "With all due respect, sir, this is unexpected. Our investors don't want apologies. They want results. If you change the way we operate, we might lose everything we've built." The businessman took a deep breath. This was the test. "Then let's rebuild it better," he said softly. "Because if our foundation is pride and fear, it will collapse anyway. I'd rather build on respect." The words stunned even him, but as he spoke them, he knew they were true. The first spark after the meeting. Some colleagues avoided him, whispering doubts, but a few approached quietly, their voices softer than before. "Thank you for saying that," one woman whispered. "I've been missing my daughter's birthdays for 3 years straight because of these deadlines. Maybe now, I can finally go home on time." Her words hit him hard. He realized how blind he had been to the sacrifices around him. Change had begun, small but real. The letter. That night, back in his hotel room, the businessman opened his laptop. Instead of reviewing reports, he opened a blank page. He began to type slowly. "Dear son, I know words may not heal what years of silence have broken. But today I tried something new. I admitted I was wrong, not only to you but to the people at work. It wasn't easy, but I kept hearing the words of someone I met on a flight. Life doesn't stop giving us opportunities. It's us who stop believing we can. I believe now, and I want to believe for us too. I don't expect you to forgive me today, but I want to show you that I am changing. I want to earn back your trust one day at a time. He read the letter twice, tears blurring his eyes. Then he pressed send. The echo of forgiveness. The days after the letter felt heavier than the businessman expected. Every morning he woke up with the same thought. Will my son reply today? Every time his phone buzzed, his heart raced, only to fall back into silence when it wasn't him. He kept working, showing small changes in his behavior. He thanked his staff more, listened instead of shouting, and let meetings end early so people could go home. Some were skeptical, others curious, but slowly, whispers spread through the office. The man they once feared was beginning to feel human. But at night, when the lights of the city flickered outside his window, loneliness returned. He longed for the voice of his son, the warmth of family he had neglected for years. The message 3 nights after sending the letter, his phone finally lit up with a notification. His breath caught in his throat. It was from his son. The message was short. Dad, I got your email. I don't know if I'm ready to believe you yet, but I read it twice. Maybe we can talk. Not now. But soon. Tears blurred his vision as he read the words over and over. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing, but it was a door opening, even if only a small crack. He whispered to himself, "Thank you," as though his son could hear him across the miles. The coffee shop the following weekend. The businessman decided to walk instead of driving his usual luxury car. He needed space, air, a reminder of life outside glass towers and boardrooms. He stopped at a small coffee shop on the corner, the kind of place he would have once ignored as too ordinary. Inside, the smell of roasted beans and warm pastries filled the air. The sound of laughter and conversation wrapped around him like a blanket. And then he froze. Sitting quietly at a table near the window, with a simple cup of tea in front of him, was Keanu Reeves. The businessman's heart raced. Part of him wanted to walk away, afraid of appearing foolish, but another part pushed him forward. "Mr. Reeves," he said softly. Keanu looked up and smiled, the same gentle smile he remembered from the flight. "Hello again." The businessman sat down, almost trembling. You won't believe this, but I did what you said. I called my son. I wrote him a letter. And he replied." "He actually replied?" Keanu's smile deepened. "That's wonderful, see? One step at a time." The businessman shook his head. "But it's so hard. Every day I feel like slipping back, like the old me is waiting to take control again." Keanu sipped his tea slowly, then said, "That's normal. Change isn't about never falling back. It's about standing up again every time you do. Strength isn't being perfect, it's being persistent." The businessman leaned back, his chest tight with emotion. The story shared. Keanu set his cup down, his eyes thoughtful. "Let me tell you something," he said quietly. "I've known loss. I've known pain that doesn't leave. But I learned something important. Pain can either make you bitter or make you softer. The world will always test you. The question is, what will you let it turn you into?" His words struck deep, like stones sinking into the businessman's chest. "I don't want to be bitter anymore," he whispered. Keanu nodded gently. "Then don't. Every choice every day is a seed. Plant the ones you want to grow." The quiet act as they talked. A young boy from the shop came running toward the counter, holding a handful of coins. "Excuse me," the boy said shyly. "Is this enough for the cookie?" The cashier looked sympathetic. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you're short by $1. Before the boy could reply, Keanu reached into his pocket, pulled out a bill, and placed it on the counter. "Keep the change," he said softly. The boy's face lit up, and he ran back to his table with the cookie in hand. The businessman watched, stunned. The gesture had been so small, so quiet, yet so powerful. No cameras, no audience, no headlines, just kindness for its own sake. He realized that was the secret. Strength wasn't about big gestures. It was about the quiet ones no one else noticed. The weight of reunion. The businessman stood outside a modest house on a quiet suburban street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. In his hand, he clutched a small paper bag. Inside was nothing more than his son's favorite childhood snack, the one he used to ask for after school. It wasn't expensive, it wasn't grand, but it felt heavier than gold in his palm. His son had finally agreed to meet him. The message had been short, "Come by tomorrow." We'll talk. Now, standing in front of the door, the businessman felt fear greater than any boardroom, any contract, any deal. This was no negotiation. This was his heart on trial. The door opens. The door creaked open slowly. His son stood there, taller, older, stronger than the last time he had seen him. His face carried both resemblance and distance, a mixture of familiarity and walls built over years of hurt. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched heavy, filled with memories unspoken. Finally, the son said quietly, "You came." The businessman swallowed hard. "You asked." "I had to." His son stepped aside, motioning him in. The house smelled of books, coffee, and faint traces of lavender. It wasn't luxurious, but it was warm, alive. Everything the businessman's mansion had never been. They sat across from each other at the small dining table. The paper bag trembled in the businessman's hand as he set it down. "I brought this," he said softly. "You used to love it." His son looked at it for a long time, then gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "I remember." The confrontation silence again until the son's voice cut through. "Why now? Why after all these years?" The businessman lowered his eyes. "Because I finally realized what matters. I thought giving you things was enough. I thought showing the world I was successful would make me a good father, but I was wrong. I missed birthdays. I missed dinners. I missed you." His son's eyes glistened, but his tone stayed sharp. "Do you know how it felt? Waiting at the window on my graduation day, hoping you'd show up and then hearing you were in another meeting. I stopped hoping after a while. I stopped believing." The words stabbed deep, but the businessman didn't defend himself this time. He let the pain sink in because he knew it was the truth. "I can't erase what I did," he whispered, "but I want to change what I do now. If you let me." The breaking point, his son's jaw tightened. "Change? You think one apology fixes everything?" "No," the businessman said quickly, shaking his head. "Not one, not 10, maybe not even 100, but I will keep showing you every day until you believe me. I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." The room fell silent. His son's hands trembled on the table, torn between anger and longing. Finally, the young man whispered, "Do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't your absence. It was knowing you chose work, money, image over me. I thought I wasn't enough." Tears spilled down the businessman's cheeks. "You were always enough. I was the one who wasn't, and I don't want to fail again." The fragile embrace for a long moment, neither moved. Then slowly, his son leaned forward, resting his head in his hands. The businessman, trembling, reached across the table and placed his hand gently over his son's. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It wasn't a healed bond, but it was touch. Connection. The first fragile bridge over years of silence. His son didn't pull away. And for the businessman, that alone was more valuable than any empire he had ever built. The call remembered that night, walking back under the dark sky. The businessman's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You're doing well. Keep going." He stopped, staring at it in confusion. Then he remembered. Before leaving the coffee shop, Keanu had quietly asked for his number. "In case you need a reminder." A small smile broke across his face. Strength wasn't about standing tall alone. It was about having reminders, echoes of kindness, voices that told you not to give up when the old self tried to return. The true measure of strength weeks passed since the reunion with his son. The businessman carried the memory of that fragile moment, the touch of his son's hand as if it were a sacred treasure. It gave him strength during long days, reminded him why change mattered when the old habits whispered to return. But life has a way of testing us, not in private whispers, but in public storms. His test was about to come. The charity Galilean invitation had arrived at his office, a charity gala raising funds for children's hospitals. In the past, he would have dismissed it, considering it a distraction from serious business. But now, he felt a pull to attend. When he entered the grand hall, dressed in a simple suit instead of his usual showy attire, heads turned. Some executives whispered, surprised to see him there. Others smirked, expecting the same arrogant man they had known for years. The night went on with speeches, music, and donations. Then, to his shock, the host announced the special guest speaker, Keanu Reeves. Applause filled the hall as Keanu walked onto the stage, humble as always, dressed simply, his presence commanding yet gentle. The businessman's chest tightened. Fate had brought their paths together once more. Keanu's words. Keanu stood before the crowd, his voice steady. Life gives us many gifts. Some are joyful, some are painful. I've learned that strength is not about what we own or how loudly we speak. It's about how gently we treat those who cannot repay us. It's about showing up even when it's hard. It's about kindness in the quietest moments. His words echoed through the hall, but they struck deepest in the heart of the businessman. It felt as though Keanu was speaking directly to him, reminding him of the flight, the coffee shop, the lessons planted like seeds. Then, something unexpected happened. The host invited attendees to share stories of transformation, people who had faced themselves and chosen to change. All eyes turned to the crowd. Silence filled the room. The businessman felt his pulse race. His hands trembled. He knew this was his test. The speech of vulnerability. Slowly, he stood. Whispers spread through the hall. Some people scoffed, expecting arrogance. But his voice was quiet, almost fragile. My name doesn't matter tonight. What matters is the truth. For years, I believed success meant power, money, image. I thought strength was about being feared. But I was wrong. It cost me my family. It cost me respect. It cost me peace. The room grew still. Recently, I met someone who reminded me that life doesn't stop giving us chances. I reached out to my son after years of silence. I walked into my office and said sorry to my colleagues. I began to listen more than I spoke, and I realized something I had never understood before. Strength is not pride. Strength is humility. Strength is kindness. His voice cracked as he finished. I don't stand here as a man who has fixed everything. I stand here as a man who is learning, one day at a time, to be better. When he sat down, the hall was silent. Then slowly, applause began. Not loud, not forced, but genuine. The nod of acknowledgement across the room. Keanu caught his eyes and gave a small nod. The same nod he had given on the plane, in the terminal, in the coffee shop. A nod that said, "You've done well. Keep going." The businessman felt his chest swell, not with pride, but with gratitude. The reunion continued. That night, as he left the gala, his phone buzzed. It was his son again. "Dad, I saw the video. You looked real. I want to meet again. Maybe this time we can talk longer." His eyes blurred with tears. The walls were coming down piece by piece. The final reflection later. As he walked alone under the city lights, he remembered every step of the journey. The insults he had thrown on the plane. The silence of fear. The kindness of a stranger. The phone call trembling with apology. The fragile touch of his son's hand, and now, this moment of truth. He whispered into the night. "Thank you, Keanu. Thank you for reminding me what strength really is."